Hello and welcome to our first Your Questions Answered Ask Us Anything style event. My name is Sophie Sparks. I'm the Community Manager here at the Information Lab, and we are trialing out a new format. So we put out 5-minute how-to videos on Tableau Ultrix, Tableau Prep, Tableau Server, and we get a lot of questions asked on them about how to do specific things. And so we thought, instead of answering all those questions as chat comments, because a lot of it's better to see right in Tableau, see and understand your data. It's a lot easier to see the answers being somebody going through them than to have them written out. So we thought it'd be great to try putting a live video format out. So I'm joined by my colleague Ross here. Ross, would you like to say hi?
Hi everyone, I'm Ross. I've been a Tableau and Ultrix consultant with the Information Lab for coming up to about 3 years now. So hopefully I can be of some assistance today.
So Ross will answer sort of any questions you have. So if you do have any questions, please type them into the chat for us. And we've also gone ahead and grabbed all the questions we've seen on the videos this month so far. And so Ross will try and answer those as well. So we've got 30 minutes. Ross, I'm going to put myself on mute. And if you would like to start with sort of the questions we've already got, and if anyone does have any questions, Ross, during the stream, Ross will answer them for you.
Fantastic. Thank you then, Sophie. And I will kind of crack on. So we received a couple of questions on some of the most recent of our videos. The first of which I think is a really useful thing to see explained visually. So that's what I'm going to do now, just to kind of recap what exactly that question was focused on. It wasn't so much a question, it's more a statement of interest surrounding a point that the previous video touched on, relating to how different types of LODs interact with filters in different ways, particularly context filters. So what you can see on the screen currently is Tableau's order of operations, going from the top of the screen there with extracts filters down to table calc filters at the bottom there. And over to the right, you can see our fixed LODs and our include, exclude LODs, as well as our table calcs. And you can see at which points in that order of operations they are going to be calculated. Now, just to kind of really hammer this point home, I've put together this little visualization here. So what you can see is essentially the same chart. It's just a percentage of total for our different regions' sales figures. The bar chart on the left here, this is a table calculation. Then we have our fixed LOD in the middle here, and we have an exclude LOD over to the right-hand side of the screen. Then on the filters shelf, we have a dimension filter. So you can see we've got our region filter there. So if we just jump back to our order of operations, we have a dimension filter sitting here in the order of operations. So after context filters, but before measure filters. And we can see that our fixed LOD is going to be calculated before that dimension filter. However, our include or exclude LODs or our table calcs are going to be calculated after the fact, so after our dimension filter. And we can see this happen. So if I just go back to our visualization here, and I maybe deselect the West region, what we'll see happen is our table calculation will still add up to 100%, whilst our exclude calculation will also still add up to 100%. But our fixed LOD won't. You can see these three values, they don't add up to 100%. Now, the reason that this is happening, if we think about it in terms of our order of operations, is because with our fixed LOD, that's being calculated before the filter takes place. Whereas everything else, our include, exclude, or our table calculations, that's all going to take place after the filter. So we'll still have that 100%. However, if we want to kind of get around this, but still use our fixed LOD, we can see that we could just push our filter into context, because that's going to mean that the filter is calculated first before our LOD. So just to demonstrate this, if I jump back to the visualization, and I'm just going to leave the filter selections as they currently are. But if I then just right click on my region dimension filter, and select add context. That hill will turn grey. And we can now see that our fixed LOD, along with our other two visualizations, that's also going to add up to 100% now, simply because we're making sure that we're calculating that filter prior to calculating our LOD. So that's just a little introduction to how LODs and our filters interact depending on Tableau's order of operations. Just quite useful, I think, to see it in the flesh. Another of the questions we got was related. I think I've actually got the question here somewhere. If I just bring it into the view. So it was on a 5-minute video just in relation to using conditions in order to filter quite specifically on dates. And the question in particular in this case, where has it gone? Here it is, right at the bottom. Performance-wise, is the condition option better or using two separate fields? So just to quickly summarize what was going on in this video to put context to this question, very quickly. It's on the wrong screen, so bear with me. So this was basically an attempt to filter down to just the first day of each month for the year of 2018. So rather than taking all of our data, we just want to know what data was from the first day of each month in 2018. Now you can do this in two ways. You can see here that we have two separate filters on our filter shelf, one of year of order date and one of day of order dates. And if I just open this up, you can see in this case, we didn't have 2018 in the data set, so I've just used 2019, but the principle still stands. So you can see I've just selected 2019 in that filter. And in this day of order date filter, I've simply selected number 1. So that's just going to give me the first day of each month for the year of 2019. So that's going to give us that result. Now we can get the same result using a conditional filter like this. So if I just open this up, you can see using the formula options in the condition section of the filter options, I have simply written a formula that's going to give me exactly the same result. So day of order date should be equal to 1 and year of order date should be equal to 2019. Now the question was simply whether doing it this way with a condition and just a single filter would be more performative or would perform better than using both simple filters without using a condition. Now, I've dug into this a little bit. I didn't really find anything that I would say was a convincing answer. And tests I did proved a little inconclusive, probably just because of the very small amount of data we're actually using here. Now, my hunch would be that if you needed to do this on a large scale, then the one filter with just a single condition would probably be better. But again, this is something we can maybe look into a little bit more and perhaps even put out another 5-minute video, who knows? But that was just a kind of update on the questions that we had received recently on some of our videos. Now, with all that said, I have a couple of kind of questions in inverted commas that I can answer and walk through, but I thought it best to check with Sophie if we've had any questions in the meantime. Have we received anything?
Hey Ross, nothing so far. So if anyone does have any questions about any of this month's 5-minute videos, I'll just quickly recap what they're about. Quartiles in the analytics pane, standard deviation in the analytics pane. So looking at the analytics pane full stop. So any questions you might have around the analytics pane in Tableau, including like why bother to use it, when a lot of these calculations you can create manually by hand. Filter dates using conditions, the order of operations in Tableau, and create lines using the analytics pane again. So if anyone has any questions around those, please type them into the chat box. Also, if you have any suggestions for any future 5-minute videos you'd like to see us make about Tableau or Alteryx, Snowflake, Tableau Server, Tableau Prep, AWS, please drop them into the chat. We always love knowing what people would like us to create in the future. So Ross, let's go ahead with one of the other questions we've seen come out a lot, even though not specifically linked to one of our 5-minute videos this month.
Excellent. I'll crack on then. So, as I mentioned before, I've prepared a couple of kind of questions in inverted commas. We might come back to that one just yet. We'll do this one first. So, what we were kind of talking about in this case was, this is kind of where we're going to try and get to. You can see we've got our median plotted for our line chart, as well as having standard deviation plotted on our line chart, which is indicated by this reference band. But it's also worth saying that this is somewhat dynamic. So I can use this order date filter, for example, and it will still calculate for me that standard deviation, and it will plot that for me in Tableau. So we'll just walk through the process taken to put this together quickly, and we'll do so in a fresh workbook. Just give me a moment while Tableau opens me up a fresh workbook. There we go. And I'll just quickly connect to Superstore. And first things first, I'm just going to put together a really simple line chart view that we would, similar to what we just had on the screen. So I'm just going to right click and drag my order date field to the columns and select a continuous month of order date. And then I'm going to drag my sum of sales to the rows just to get that simple line chart. And I'm also just going to add a couple of filters. So we'll add a state or province filter, just so that when we're finished, we can demonstrate that this is in fact dynamic. I'm just going to select California and show that filter, perhaps just as a multiple value drop down, so it's a little bit neater. And then we're going to add a date range filter. So I'll just bring in my order date field and I'll just select a range of dates. And I'll just make sure to show that filter. There we go. So we're happy we've created our simple view. So now we can work on actually plotting that standard deviation dynamically across it. The first thing we're going to do is we're just going to make a calculation. So I'm going to create a calculated field. And this is going to be a window average of my sum sales. And I'm just going to call it quite simply window average sum sales. And there we go. So it's just a very simple table calculation. I'll just leave that on the screen for a moment in case anyone's following along. So just a simple window average calculating my sum of sales. And then next up, what we're going to do is we're going to create a parameter to switch between our different standard deviations, should we want to. So I'm just going to create a parameter first of all. And we're going to call this stdev. And in this case, it's just going to be an integer. And we're going to list our values of just 1, 2, and 3. So create a parameter, give it a name relating to standard deviation. In this case, I've just called it stdev. And make sure that its data type is an integer and its list of potential allowable values should just be 1, 2, and 3. So if you've done that, just go ahead and press OK. Then, of course, whenever we create a parameter, we need to connect that parameter using a calculation. So I'm just going to create a calculated field once more. And I'm just going to call this stdev. In fact, I won't put a space there because I don't think I did before. stdev calc, just to show that we're connecting that parameter using this calculation. And this is just going to be a simple if statement. So I'm going to say if stdev equals 1, then 1. It's going to be very simple. It's just going to pass the value from our parameter into a calculation. Else if stdev equals 2, then 2, else 3, end. We can see that calculation is valid, so I'm happy with that. I'll just leave it on the screen for a moment once more, but you can see it's just very simply taking those values from our parameter and just passing them into the calculation. Great. So now we're actually getting into the meaty part of what we're doing here. We're going to determine some upper and lower bounds for our standard deviations so that we can then plot those values easily. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a calculated field, and I'm going to call this upper bounds. And we're first of all going to reference the first calculation we made. So that window average of some sales, I'm just going to drag that in for ease of use and drop it there at the start of my calculation. So just bring in that first calculation, our window average sum sales. And then I'm going to add to that a slightly more complicated bit of calculation. So I'm going to do a window standard deviation calculation for my sum of sales. And then finally, I'm just going to multiply that by that standard deviation calculation that we just made. So I'm just going to multiply that by my stdev calc. And of course, I'm going to remember just to put that last bracket in place. That should make that valid. Good. So we're going to make a calculation to have that upper bounds of our standard deviation. To do so, first of all, just bring in the first calculation we made, that window average sum of sales. And then we're just going to add to that our window standard deviation of sum sales multiplied by the output of our stdev calc that we did moments ago. And once we're happy with that, I'm just going to press OK. Next up, we need to do another calculation for our lower bounds. And actually, it's going to look almost identical to the calculation we just did. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to duplicate my upper bounds calculation. And then I'm just going to edit upper bounds copy. And I'm going to call it lower bounds. And the one important change to make here is just to make sure that that plus sign is replaced with a minus sign, just to be sure that we're not going to be doing exactly the same thing again. We this time on our lower bounds instead of our upper bounds, so just make sure that that's negative. Excellent. So with those calculations done, we're now just going to add the first calculation we made, so our Windows average sum sales, our upper bounds and our lower bounds. So I've just control and clicked to select all three of them. You can do it separately. This was just so I could highlight them more easily for purposes of teaching. So bring in your window average sum sales, upper bounds and lower bounds calculations and just drop them on the detail marks card, like so. And that is going to enable us to add our reference lines. So now if I move to the analytics pane and I look for a reference line, I'm going to bring in a reference line and I'm going to do it across sum sales table. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to connect this one to my window average sum of sales. My label will be the value, and I'm just going to edit this to how I would like it to look. I might make it a little bit paler, perhaps. In fact, not too pale. There we go. So that's going to be my window average sum of sales plotted across the chart there. And then with that done, I can then bring in a reference band this time. So instead of a line, I'm going to bring in a reference band. And once again, I'm just going to drop that in the same area. So sum of sales across the whole table. And now I can use these band from and band to areas to specify my upper and lower bounds. So I think in this case, band from should be my lower bounds. There we go. You can see that's moved. So I've definitely selected the right one. And I'm just going to use the label to show the value in this case. And my band 2 should, of course, be that upper bound. Once again, I'm just going to label the value. And just like that, I can then choose to, I can color this however I like, really. Maybe I'll use an orange just to change it up a little bit. But with that, I can press OK. And what we should find is that this reference band and all of these lines really should be dynamic. So I can change the date selection, for example, and it's going to adjust accordingly. So quite happy with that. The last thing we can do, maybe just to make this a little bit clearer, it would be nice to have each actual point highlighted in a color, depending on whether it was in those bounds or not. So to do that, we're just going to do a quick color calculation. So I'll create a calculated field, and I'll just call this color calculation just for speed's sake. And this is, again, just going to be a simple if statement. So if my sum of sales is greater than my upper bounds, then I simply want to say above. Else if my sum of sales is less than my lower bounds, then below. So you can see I'm just assigning categorical value depending on the relationship between that sum of sales value and my bounds. So then the final option, of course, is else within bounds. And again, I'll just leave that on the screen for a moment. So you can see we've just said, if my sum of sales is greater than my upper bounds value, then above. Else if my sum of sales is less than my lower bounds, then below. Otherwise, just give me the value of within bounds. So what I'll do is I'm just going to dual axis my sum of sales. So to do this, I'm just going to hold down Control and drag that sum of sales field from the rows next to itself. I'm going to right click and just select dual axis. So you can see we've now just pushed all of that onto a single axis. And then I'm just going to get rid of this secondary right-hand axis, but not before remembering to synchronize it, of course. So I'll synchronize the axes, and then I'll just hide this right-hand one. And then on my new second axis, I'm just going to change my mark type to a circle. So we've got a nice circle for each point on our line chart now. And then I can simply bring in my color calculation onto the color marks card of that secondary axis. And there we go. So we've got conditionally colored points along our line chart just to make it really, really clear where they lie within the bounds of our standard deviation. And as I said earlier, all of this should now be dynamic, like so. Pretty cool. Awesome. Sophie, were there any other questions before I jump into the last little piece I've got prepared?
Nothing through so far, Ross. So yeah, if you want to jump into the last bit you have, is that around the order of operations?
It was around, well, I'll explain.
Perfect.
Once I've got it up on the screen. It's probably the easiest thing. So, I don't know if anyone watching this has ever come across this issue, but if you ever want to apply a median reference line, say, to a specific cell, when you have multiple levels of cells, it can start to become a little bit tricky to get it to do what you want. Now, what you can see here, and you can see I've named this sheet problem, just to show you where we're trying to get to, first of all, might help a little. So in this solution tab, you can see that we have an average, well, we have a median sum of sales for each of our categories of furniture, office supply, or technology. But you can see that there's actually a level below that within our visualization. So we've got our quarters of order date below that category, which is just kind of muddying the waters of which pane we're talking about when we're trying to apply a reference line. Now, this can become really tricky because Tableau will automatically assume that you want to apply the reference line to the lowest pane it can find. So in this case, you can start to see why we have a problem here, because we've simply, in fact, if I remove this, you can see exactly what I mean when I bring it in. So if I want to bring in my median with quartiles, let's say, and I want to do it across just the panes, and in this case, we wanted to go across the category panes, not the quarter panes, that isn't what Tableau is going to do for me. It's going to assume that I want to add those reference lines onto that lowest pane level it can find, when that's actually not what we wanted. So how do we get what we want? Well, there's a nice simple way of doing this. And you can see I've demonstrated it in this solution tab. And the solution is to do a little calculation such as this. You can see it's relatively simple. It's just a window median sum of sales. If I just duplicate this and remove the reference line, first of all. So we've got our, if I just bring this in again, I'm going to bring in my window median sum of sales field. And I'm going to add a reference line to pane, and I'm just going to connect the two. And with that done, what I'm actually just going to quickly change that as well, make this look a little bit neater. Currently, it's just going to kind of go across the entire table. But what we're going to do is we're just going to edit this table calculation. So I'm going to right click on my table calculation that's on the detail shelf. And I'm just going to say edit. And once in here, I'm just going to change this option to specific dimensions. And then I'm going to deselect the level of detail that I want it to actually apply a reference line to. So in this case, I'm going to deselect my category field. And what we should see is that now we have that reference line is applying to the pane that we wanted it to apply to. So it's a little bit of a kind of hacky way around it, but it basically gets us to where we want to go. And it's going to solve that problem of Tableau, just assuming it knows which level you actually want to apply a reference line to when you have multiple tiered levels of panes. And it's going to allow you to actually select how you want to apply that reference line. So hopefully that's helpful to anyone out there with a similar issue. And with that, I think we've kind of powered through everything.
Thank you so much, Ross. We haven't got any questions coming through, but we've got some people dialing in from the States, from Ohio. So it's great to have people tuning in from around the world. And no questions, but thanks for the walkthrough. Last question, as we're just on time, so I think this is about it. So thank you so much, Ross. If anybody has any further questions about any of the videos we put up this month, drop them on underneath the videos in the comments, and we'll try and answer them for you. Now, if you found this type of event helpful, or if you'd like us to run more of these, do let me know in the comments. or let me know on our YouTube community page, and we will be running another one of these in July to see if this is something we should keep on doing. So your feedback is really, really important and appreciated. So thank you so much, Ross, for taking us through those how-tos and live questions. And for everyone tuning in, thank you so much for giving us your time. Hopefully see you, coming in from Nigeria. So good evening to you, and hopefully see everyone again end of July. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.